I worked at an amusement park in the 80s and saw some disturbing things. It wasn't all bad, the staff were great, the pay was decent, and there were all kinds of perks, including free day passes. There were lots of reasons to keep the staff coming back, but there was a bigger reason why people left. I spent 2 summers there as a lifeguard and shouldn't have gone back after the first year, but I needed money for college, and since the park itself was only in its 3rd year of operation, I'd have seniority over whoever came back. The place was called Thriller World, and to understand it you need to know its history. The park was a large plot of land at the base of the Tremblay Mountains. In the early 1920s, it was the location of a coal mine that dropped 1,000 feet straight down into the earth. It was a working and profitable mine for 30 years, but closed its shutters in the late 50s. The mine was owned by the Phelps family. Randall Phelps was one of the more industrious of the clan, and he stepped up to develop the land in the 60s to create a ski hill and resort. The mountain was long and treacherous, and attracted enough customers over the years to invest in some minor improvements, but still they were barely breaking even. So Randall came up with an idea to use the land in the summer months, and that idea was Thriller World. It was an amusement park that would include all manner of rides as well as physical aquatic adventures. There was an insane wave pool, tubing around an artificial river with rapids and heavy currents that circled the entire park in a quick-moving moat. There were slides that ran through tubes of varying lengths down the side of the mountain and opened up to a large pool at the center of the park. There was a Big Dipper bumper cars, one of those pendulum rides, a fast-moving Ferris wheel, a human trebuchet and giant safety net, a teacup spinner, a carousel, a grand haunted mansion. There were shooting and throwing games and prizes and food vendors. There was even a zip line over top of the entire park that would continually get stuck in the middle. And then there was the attraction that sparked Randall's imagination to create the whole thing. It was called Thrill Racer and was a race from the top of the mountain to the very bottom. You basically strapped yourself to an engineless, lightweight bumper car, which had flimsy hand brakes you could use to try to slow down. Outside of that, the speed was entirely gravity-driven by the steep slope down the mountainside. The path of Thrill Racer wasn't straight down, but zigzagged around corners marked by large rocks with arrows painted on them. The ride down took just under 3 minutes on average, but some of the workers would stay after hours and try to set records. This is where I first experienced death at Thriller World. It was my first summer and my second full week working there as a lifeguard. I'd saved 2 kids from near drownings in the wave pool and was feeling shell-shocked. Davis, one of the older lifeguards what coached me since I'd started, told me all kinds of stories about the previous summer and the injuries and deaths that had witnessed in the park's first year operating. I think the stories were meant to be comforting. What Davis said it came down to was, this place wasn't a picnic. It was dangerous, and people who weren't ready for that attracted problems to themselves. The accidents were almost always the customer ignoring the rules. There was the occasional freak accident, and then very rarely a ride malfunction. But he reiterated, Thriller World wasn't the county fair. It was a place you had to keep your eyes and ears open, and there was a reason why, amongst its staff, Thriller World had adopted a nickname drenched in blood, Killer World. Somehow it made me feel better knowing that others were aware of what was going on, but weren't worried. And Davis had that young and invincible teenager to him that was infectious to anyone who didn't. Like me, I found myself drunk with some of the girls who worked the game's tents. We watched as several of the operations and maintenance staff of the park were set to race for the lifeguards down the mountain on the go-karts. Davis was one of the lifeguards. The maintenance guys brought a box of flares, and each of the carts was fitted with one along the back bumper. One of the lifeguards, Kara, went up to the top of the hill with a scarf to be the countdown girl. When Kara said ready, everyone readied their flares. When she said set, everyone lit their flares. Kara yelled, "Go loud enough for it to echo down the mountain to us at the bottom." We watched as the racers took off, their red flares spraying out and illuminating them as the go-karts took corners and ripped down the straightaways. It was exhilarating being in the group as we all cheered for the different drivers and teams. Several of the carts were pulling away, with one far ahead of the rest. The leader was hitting corners hard and didn't seem to be using the brakes at all. Then it lost control. The go-kart hit a corner, it was sharp, and it flipped, sending the driver colliding headfirst off a large boulder and into a violent tumble down the side of the mountain. Screams pierced out as the go-kart, lit by the red flare, launched into the air before crashing down and spinning and tumbling all the way to the bottom of the mountain. The body was still halfway up. Everyone who was watching ran up the side of the mountain. By the time we got there, the maintenance staff and the lifeguards who had been racing were circled around the body. It was Davis, though it didn't really look like a person. It looked like a plush toy with all the stuffing taken out. Davis' girlfriend, Molly, another lifeguard who had been cheering beside me, rushed over and dropped beside his body. She tried to pick him up and hold him, but found Davis' body was like picking up wet laundry. The bones and muscles were pulverized. Molly tried to touch Davis' face, but even that was like a large Ziploc bag overfilled with lasagna. The investigation revealed that Davis had been going too fast and lost control. The go-kart head used was destroyed in its fall, so it was difficult to tell if the brakes had been working. But there were no marks on the pavement. Either way, it was pushed aside, and by Tuesday, everything at the park was back to normal. Except Molly never came back. I didn't blame her. I developed a drinking problem that summer, but managed to get it under control by the time I left. For school, I told myself I wouldn't work at Thriller World the following summer. But when time came to look for a job, there was little else in town that was hiring. I went back for my second summer, trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as I remembered. The thrill racer was back in operation, as were all the other dangerous rides. But this year there was a new one at Thriller World. Management always offered money to any of its employees who would test the new rides themselves, both for entertainment and safety. But in their newest ride, no employee would test it. It was called the Mine Drop. Over the winter, Randall had brought in engineers to work on the mine, reinforce its structure, and update and adapt its elevator to one that moves at an unnerving speed, up and down. The elevator would take 10 people at a time and drop them 1,000 feet down into the pitch black. Since there'd been a cave-in at the bottom of the mine in the 1950s, which resulted in its closure, there wasn't anywhere to go down there, so the elevator would slowly bring them back up. There was talk of adding in stops along the way up, where riders could get off and explore certain closed-in areas of the mine, perhaps even adapt the haunted mansion into the tunnel systems. But it never got to that point. In fact, it never even opened to the public. Randall paid 10 people from a local shelter to come test out the mine drop after Weddall refused. The elevator reached the bottom and was halfway back up when all 3 safety mechanisms malfunctioned and the elevator dropped to the bottom. All 10 people were killed on impact. Their bodies were found in a pile of pulverized bone and meat. Randall did an exemplary job of keeping the details from the public, as he did with all the accidents that occurred, but the events of the rest of the summer couldn't be kept quiet. It seemed like every week the injuries got worse and another body was added to the pile. In the wave pool, there were drownings from children being pulled into the suction generators. When the bodies were found, it was discovered they hadn't drowned. Their bodies had somehow been pulverized by the jets, their bones and muscles liquefied. In the artificial river rapids that circled the park, there were a variety of strange deaths, including drownings and electrocutions from the underwater fans and the ungrounded electricity that circulated through the park. The lifeless bodies would be carried by the ongoing current around the park's moat until they were pulled out by special lifeguards referred to as pickers. One afternoon I arrived for a shift, and as I passed the entrance I saw the bodies of Tabors, one after the other, face down, floating by like logs taken downstream in a heavy current. Apparently they were on their second lap around the park, and none of the pickers had seen them. Their bodies, too, were pulverized, but those were explained away as the bodies being tossed and bounced off the walls and fake rocks in the artificial river. I remember pulling one kid out of the water who had just been on the edge of drowning. His body was covered in bruises. I heard him talk about hands in the water, hands squeezing him, hands pulling him down. I never managed to find the kid after that to ask him more, but I heard he moved away. The final nail in the coffin of Thriller World came at the end of August, and it involved Thriller House, the park's haunted mansion. The mansion was built specifically for the park and was filled with hidden rooms and stairwells and shifting walls. It was easy to get lost in it, and people did. A lot. In fact, it was the attraction that seemed to cause the most issues among the people who used it. There were several kids who went missing inside because of the scale of the mansion and the shifting walls. Some weren't found for hours. When they were finally discovered, it was always in the House of Mirrors room in the basement, and the children were always babbling incoherently. Thriller House also had a secret way up to the attic that most customers didn't find. Some of the other employees would go up there to drink sometimes after shifts. I joined them after one bad Wednesday. I was uneasy the whole time. The room was huge, and there were only 6 of us, but it felt like the area was filled with breathing bodies pressing in on you. No one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't shake it. Then the power cut out, and we had a reason to call it a night. The mansion creaked like an old home, even though it only looked like one. When we left, the walls leading to the doors out shifted on us and led us down to the basement, where we got lost for a half hour in the pitch black of the terrifying cellar. There were all kinds of frightening statues and props dangling from the walls and ceiling. We thought we were going to spend all night down there, but I finally found the hidden door leading up to the first floor. We got out and all went our separate ways. It wasn't until the next day at work when we found out a younger lifeguard named Jill hadn't come home last night after her shift. She was one of the people who had been drinking with us in the attic. We all thought back and realized she hadn't come out of the basement with us. None of us saw her again after we left the attic. We agreed to go and tell our supervisors what we knew, but we never got the chance. While we were meeting to discuss what happened, a father had gone into Thriller House with his family and discovered the way up to the attic. In the attic, several of the floorboards broke, and the family of 4 fell through. They landed on a group of 5 people below them on the second floor. The second floor then collapsed onto 8 people on the first floor, which then collapsed into the basement, and 3 more people. Wad just discovered Jill's body. And all 2 were dead and 17 were trapped in the basement under the rubble. The survivors were near paralyzed, all with the same injuries involving pulverized bones and muscles. As paramedics and firemen filled the mansion and lowered into the basement to start the rescue mission, an aggressive electrical fire started and caused the near-immediate collapse of all the weakened floors. 8 members of emergency services were crushed under the rubble and unable to escape the basement. Inferno as it burned out of control. I left after that shift and the park never reopened. If Thriller House wasn't enough, dozens of other lawsuits had piled up over the summer and a federal investigation was underway. The Phelps family sold the property to pay off the lawsuits, and as far as I can tell, there were never any criminal charges or jail time for anyone. A few families of the victims got settlements, but that was about it. Most people think what happened at Thriller World was negligence, cutting corners and saving costs. But in the years that followed, I did my own research into the mountain and uncovered some history that disturbed me. The ski resort in the winter had similar strange and disturbing injuries and deaths as Thriller World. There were electrocutions on the ski lifts, killing multiple riders as well as operators. There were other electrocutions, most of them in the hot tubs in the personal chalets. 5 skiers were decapitated by an overhead metal wire that had fallen across the route down the mountain. There were horrific downhill crashes resulting in disfigurement and, in many cases, dismemberment. Somehow, all the bodies had the same specific trait in common. They were pulverized. So I researched further back and started finding difficult answers. When the mine was shut down in the 1950s, it was because of a miners' strike. The strike was being led by 12 men who had constantly been at odds with the Phelps family over pushing union affiliation. Details were hazy, but a late-night meeting was to be held in the mines among the miners and the Phelps. But there was a cave-in. All 12 of the miners' representatives were killed. None of the Phelps family had gone down to meet them. The miners' bodies were eventually found, but an investigation was stalled and then closed due to the Phelps family's ties to local and state governments. The bodies of the miners were said to all be the same, pulverized, the muscle and bones liquefied by the collapsed tunnel they'd been told to go to. Story 2. I'm a theme park mascot. Some kids just deserve to die. The costume I was forced to wear as mascot for Derby's Funland was not built for warm weather or user comfort. I was sweating profusely as I stood outside in the noonday sun, a silent prisoner in my oversized get-up as I put on a fake happy voice, dancing and capering with visitors, all the while dying inside. This wasn't what I'd pictured when I'd decided to become a character actor. The costume had the oversized head of a cartoon dog, whose gaping mouth I peered out from within. The character wore a blue sailor outfit, a blatant ripoff of a popular duck character created by another brand, a fact which I was heckled for constantly. "Hey, Derby, duck," a little kid yelled, tossing his hot dog at me and staining my costume yellow with mustard across the front. It was the third time that morning I'd been assaulted by a child, which was my cue to take a smoke break. I began stomping away when someone called after me angrily, "Hey, asshole, my kid wanted a show. Where do you think you're going?" I turned around and saw a red-faced man with a large camera strapped around his neck, wearing a fanny pack and an Ed Hardy shirt. The devil child's father, I presumed. "Whoops," I said, gritting my teeth and looking down at the obnoxious twerp who just branded me with mustard. "How do you Derby do, little fella? Are you having a great day at Derby's Fun Land?" The kid leered up at me, grinning a gap-toothed bully's smile. "You wrecked my Derby dog. Now I want a new one. No, I want an ice cream cone." The little snot knew damn well what he'd done. His dad hadn't seen it, but the two of us knew that he'd purposefully ruined my costume with his hot dog and was now blaming me for it. It was too much for me to handle. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was the fact that I hadn't eaten breakfast yet, or maybe it was just the infuriating grin of that punk kid staring up at me, knowing he could get away with murder. "I think you're remembering that wrong, little friend. You threw your hot dog at Derby. Hey, my kid wouldn't do that. Don't blame him for your clumsy ass." The little boy took a cue from his father and started crying crocodile tears. "Derby's a big fat liar. He wrecked my hot dog." A moment later, the guy was attacking me, shoving me until eventually my manager had to come over, his face a frustrating mask of calm. "What seems to be the problem here? This punk ruined my kid's lunch, and now he's trying to blame him for it. I should sue you guys." "Sure, sue me for a hot dog," I thought in my head. Thankfully, it had gone too far by this point, and I knew better than to say it out loud. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. Please, follow me this way. Let me take you to our VIP lounge, and we'll get you and your son some complimentary refreshments. Looks like you need a refill there, too." He pointed at the dad's red plastic cup of beer, nearly empty. The guy finished it off in one long swig and tossed the cup at a nearby trash can, missing completely. "Damn straight, Seaman Schuyler. We're VIPs," he slurred before burping loudly. I'd seen this before. Some people tried to make a stink about everything just to get free stuff. But this douchebag was taking it to another level. Even the kids seemed to be in on it, and they were gonna reward this behavior. Hell no. I'd never even heard of the Derby's Fun Land Visitor VIP Lounge, but it sounded badass, and this guy didn't deserve whatever pampering he was about to get. I was picturing champagne and caviar, cigars, and high-quality porno magazines. My boss looked over his shoulder at me with a glare that said he'd talk to me later, then escorted the two away into a secret door hidden behind a fake tree prop. I followed them, thinking I would give my boss a piece of my mind. If he fired me, so be it. I'd taken enough abuse. The dark tunnel behind the fake tree was long and lined with ancient brick. It appeared to be as old as the park itself. Far up ahead I could hear the echoing voices of the man and his bratty kid talking over my manager as he apologized. I hustled along to catch up with them, but then the sounds of them talking abruptly stopped. It was replaced by a meaty, walloping noise like someone tenderizing meat, except they'd forgotten to remove the bone first. As I walked quietly through the dark tunnel, the sounds of hammering eventually stopped and were replaced by a different noise. It sounded like something heavy being dragged slowly over the cobblestones, slow and deliberate. Terrified now for reasons I wasn't sure of, I kept my footsteps as quiet as I could, peeking around the corner. My manager was up ahead with another person, and they were dragging two dead bodies along, one large, one small, and leaving blood trails behind them like giant, wounded slugs. No, that's not possible. I must be seeing things. That can't be right, I told myself. A door opened and closed, and they dragged the bodies inside. I hurried along, careful not to step in the bloody trails which had been left on the stone. When I finally came to the door at the end, I looked at the writing on the sign with stunned disbelief. Derby's Funland. In-house hot dog production facility. It read, authorized personnel only. I pushed open the door and snuck inside. The room was dark, and the sounds of a machine running could be heard nearby. My heart pounding in my chest, feeling sick and light-headed, I crept towards those sounds. What I saw in that back room I will never forget. My manager dropped off the two bodies and walked right past me out the door we had come in through. He didn't see me in the shadows as I watched what happened next. A huge man in a white butcher's apron was sharpening a cleaver. He was at least 7 feet tall, his belly large and hanging over his belt. He picked up the limp body of the dead father like he was a beef tenderloin, not even straining as he set him on the workbench in front of him. Blood poured out of his head, staining the surface red. Then he took the cleaver and began to chop, cutting him up into usable pieces. Each piece he stuck into a massive red machine that looked like it was from another century, a giant, diesel-belching automated meat grinder which took the hands, legs, arms, and pieces of torso he fed into it and turned them into ground hamburger meat. I had no choice but to stay and listen to the sounds and to breathe in the coppery smells of that horrible room as he worked, first cutting up the father, then moving on to the son. If I left, I knew my boss would see me running out the back tunnel, and who knew what he would do if that happened. This dark secret of Derby's Funland was not meant for my eyes. As soon as I thought it was safe, I bolted out of there, being careful not to let the butcher see me. When I got back to the break room, I collapsed on the couch. I needed to get out of there, to tell someone. But first I needed to rest for a moment, to process what I just witnessed. But before I could even begin to think, the door burst open. My manager and several co-workers came in. They all had their mouths full and were chewing, holding hot dogs, and my boss was carrying a tray loaded with the park's signature Derby dogs. Hey, sorry about earlier, buddy, but guess what? It's Employee Appreciation Day. Free Derby dogs for everybody. Eat up. What could I say? Even terrified as I was, I'd forgotten to bring lunch, and they smelled delicious. I picked up a dog and took a bite, then spoke with my mouth full. Story 3. You've probably never heard of Disney's abandoned theme park in St. Louis, Mo. You may find this hard to believe. If you can't believe it, please put your phone down or proceed to an entirely different no-sleep story. Let me start off by saying that I grew up in North St. Louis. My mom worked 2 jobs, while my brother and I stayed home by ourselves during the summer. I was the oldest at 16 and my younger brother, Jaron, was 12. We got along pretty well. Both of us didn't go out much or have any family outside of my mom and grandpa, who we called Pops. His home was about a 20-minute walk from ours. Occasionally we'd go up there to check on him. He'd bought us a PlayStation 3, which was a big deal 5 years back. We spent most of our time playing Twisted Metal and various other old school games. We grew up in a poverty-stricken area and struggled to pay bills or put food on the table. Most nights Mom bought us ramen or McDonald's, but Pops wasn't like that. He wanted to show us a good time. It wasn't like we weren't thankful for everything our mom did for us, because we were, but we preferred spending time with Pops. One particular day Jaron said Pops had called and told us to come over as soon as we could. We grabbed our bikes and sped to his house until sweat poured down our foreheads. We were expecting the worst, maybe a robbery, but when we walked inside there was Pops, sitting on his antique orange puke-colored sofa with a big smile on his face. You'll never believe what I have here, boys. He waved around 3 tickets in his hand. Jaron ran over to Pops and reached for the tickets. Hey Q, we're going to a theme park, he said with a smile spreading across his entire face. What, hell no, I said in disbelief. Language, son, Pops said, standing up from the course. And hell yes, I entered a contest a few months back and the tickets just came. This has to be some sort of trick. Like they're going to steal our rims or something off your Cadillac or the whole thing altogether, I said rationally. Why you always gotta be that way, Q? Jaron said in defeat. Fine, we can go, but if we dip out if we see anything weird, I say. Deal. Pops and Jaron say in unison. Pops, Jaron, and I hopped into his 1963 Cadillac. I was shocked to see that the invitation was located at such a ghetto area in the middle of nowhere. It was about a 40-minute drive. There ain't no ghetto-ass, mother, I started to say, but Pops interrupted me. We need this kind of change, son. This will help our community. This theme park might raise our community out of poverty. Sure enough, the park was real. I could see the roller coasters and Ferris wheel in the background. The music from the carousel echoed throughout the parking lot. That's when I noticed the Disney logo, but something seemed off about it. The lettering was somehow distorted. The entrance was completely empty. There wasn't a person in sight except the attendant. Welcome to Disneyland Park at St. Louis. Are you the lucky winners of the early passes? Why, yes, we are, Pops says, handing the man the 3 tickets. Wonderful. You're going to have a magical time. When he smiled, all of his teeth were yellow, as if he hadn't brushed them in ages. He let out a big old laugh, while his belly protruded from the skin-tight Disney uniform. Jaron ran straight towards the biggest roller coaster. Pops steadily ran after him. He'll catch up to you, I said, examining the park. From the corner of my eye, I saw 2 employees dressed as Mickey and Pluto. They stood perfectly still and stared at me, as if they were ready to jump me. I walked the opposite way and avoided any of the employees that I came into close contact with. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that something felt off about this whole thing, or the feeling that someone was watching me. I steadily moved forward and found a fun house. I walked inside, hoping that the animatronics would be the only thing I ran into. It was Nightmare Before Christmas themed. As I walked through every room, I was greeted by different characters until I reached the last section. It was a fun house full of mirrors, but I wasn't the only one in there. I saw a guy dressed in a Mickey costume staring at me. I tried to reach for him, but there were too many mirrors. Finally, he spoke in a low and sunken voice. "You shouldn't be here. My family was invited. We're the Whites. My grandpa won tickets. You shouldn't be here. Get out," he said. I found my way out of the fun house and frantically started searching for Pops and my brother. I finally found them by the large carousel. They were just watching it spin in circles. "Pops, Jaron, I think we should bounce." As they turned around, I saw a look of horror in both of their faces, as if they had just seen a ghost. "Pops, let's go," I yelled. Pops looked over at Jaron as tears welted from his eyes and poured down his cheeks. He grabbed Jaron by the hand and we ran as fast as we could out of the theme park. "Thank you. Come again," the front attendant said, waving at us. It was quiet in the car. The three of us didn't manage to say a word as we drove back to Pop's house. Jaron and I rode our bikes to the house as he locked himself in his room. "What happened?" I asked, banging on his bedroom door. "I," was all he managed to mutter. That was the last word Jer ever muttered. He went mute after that day. It was also the last day I ever saw Pops. He died that night of a heart attack. It's been 5 years since that fateful day. I went back, hoping to get some clues as to what had happened to my family, but there wasn't much to be found. I knew I was in the exact location as before. This time there was only a shell of the Disney gate with rusted words peeling from the metal. I pushed open the gate as the rusted metal scraped against the ground. I searched for something, anything to prove that the park ever existed apart from the sign, but it was just nothingness, like it never even existed. Story 4. I think I discovered a theme park's horrible secret. That is, if you even believe me, being a single father is hard. I thought taking my son on an outing to Thrilling Journeys Park on one of my rare days off work would make it just a little bit easier. It didn't. Now, if you're from the area or have ever visited the park, you probably know that it isn't exactly kid-friendly, being mostly populated with high-intensity roller coasters. It held the distinction of being the only non-thrill ride at the park. I honestly always thought it was a little creepy. The ride was probably the oldest at Thrilling Journeys. It remained open for years for two main reasons. "Can we go, Daddy? Please?" I was hesitant. I'd only been on the ride a couple of times, and I remembered that while its first half was a little uncanny, but pleasant enough, the second half was absolutely terrifying. "I don't know, buddy," I said to Michael. "I think that one's a little scary." "I'm okay with scary," Michael said. "I just don't like fast and tall. This one doesn't go fast, and it's on the ground." I couldn't really argue with that. I sighed. "Well, if you're sure," I said. "Happy Jazzy music was playing. We began our journey by passing through a brick tunnel and into the monster world. "Hey there, y'all," she greeted us, moving jerkily, looking every which way with her fluttering mechanical eyes. "Welcome to our picnic. We're so very happy to see y'all. Sure do hope y'all have a fun time. And oh, one last thing. Stay out of the swamp." Bubbles drifted from the ceiling. Water fountains spouted. Multicolored lights flashed playfully amid the darkness. We passed by a monster who was basically all lips, stationed at a kissing booth, making kissing noises. There was also a monster with a glowing red mouth participating in a chili eating contest. That was cute. I glanced over at Michael. He was positively enthralled. No tears yet. Eventually, though, it came time for the scary part. A monster sheriff with an oversized badge and a wide-brimmed hat popped up, standing next to a cop car with flashing lights. Wait. Now, where are you all going? Stay out of the swamp. Stay out of the swamp. No, we found ourselves awash in sudden darkness. Ominous noises sounded, and we heard sinister cackling from the wicked monsters we were about to face. "All right, Bud," I said to Michael, ready for the scary part. But Michael didn't answer. Was he so frightened he couldn't speak? I reached over. A parent's worst nightmare realize. "Michael?" I shouted. He was gone. Had he fallen out of the boat? I panicked. I couldn't see anything. The loud cackling from the evil monsters seemed to mock me. I nearly stood up, but quickly sat back down once the boat started rocking. "Stop the rye." I thundered to whoever could hear. "Stop the fucking rye." My son fell out of the boat. Embedded in the piles of fake cold coins and jewels were the infamous skeleton props. Woman, a monster seethed at me, his eyes too big for his small, reptilian head bulged outward. They were completely white and glowing. No pupils at all. They appeared soft and moist, almost organic. His body was covered in coarse black fur. He sported tall, crooked horns, resembling those of a stag. Before I could scream his name again, the lights switched on. Thank God. It was about damn time. I'd just gotten back to the sheriff animatronic. Michael was standing on one of the grassy mounds next to the cop car. He didn't look scared. Bothered, maybe. Guilty, definitely, but not scared. He was completely dry, and not a scratch on him. "Michael," I cried in relief. Wading over to him, I climbed onto the grassy mound, knelt down, and started busily inspecting my son for injuries. "Are you hurt?" I asked frantically. Michael shook his head. He told me. No, in a small voice. He didn't seem to want to meet my eyes. "Michael," I said sternly. "Michael, what happened?" I just didn't want to do the scary part." He confessed. I stared at him, dumbstruck. Then I sighed deeply. I wasn't the suing type, but for this I could make an exception. It was ridiculous how incredibly easy it was for a child to simply exit the boat and just waltz onto the sets. Who designed this death trap? I was surprised more kids hadn't been crushed by a boat or concussed by a monster's swinging robotic arm. I know it was scary, Michael, but you have to stay in the boat at all times, no matter what. I told him, "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Can we finish the ride now?" I sighed again. "No, Michael," I told him firmly. "Are you mad?" His voice was a little unsteady. "No, I'm not mad. I really wasn't. Not at him, at least." I searched for an exit. The ones you see in every one of these rides that break the immersion to let you know where you can get out in cases of emergency. Surprisingly, there weren't any to be seen. Maybe they were further down, or the morons who designed this place were even more reckless than I thought and never put them in. Maybe why shalt go someone? I looked down at my friendle. Man, I asked, what man? There ways am on wolfen. He told Mest and Dorothy Kefifif, Noni Fismodinus, and where'd he go? I asked it curiously, I fit was nampla. Why hadn't we tedalichum? Had to left at Turtons, men style point teddentintif. He went back there, hessade, curious, I brush at the vacaspizman, and Reno, there was a longa libly, with a set of dorshant. The how way was plain cold and industrial looking, almost certain of fiat and efforts the senatory offered. I think quell having it tick, I said. It told Michael to went wearing the ladan and in a dead when wegeteth the dortst. I beshed them upon. They W-E-R-E and single quotes T locked as I-H alf expected. We entered a warehouse dash-like setting. West Tebet sand befriend tennis. We saw whole finished shed figures. Thyre faces sat a carrot and wire skeleton spirically. To so's thatra and a pfeffin nephisilis. Playful possess antrin tones. He grimaced. It didn't want a lacalic shriction toth magicos the anima trinidae spenza. Boothe didn't task woes. He was sasharped. Heprobablic when trantles. Before Weckle de Ferrites, Wassedenly Herdefi Quiantix Lu Kingman and Cacafola Fefson. Oh, hello, sir, Hesite quickly, Izzy Uva founders, yeah, nothing sto, is Nepedak. Height he held of a Philophia I'm sorry, sir. But we couldn't HAV him back here. It's too dangerous, and leaving him a feast him, sir, he understands Europes. But we can single quotes, THAV people back here. Now, please, few single quotes, like, I can escort shuto tontex. Hidden see in your exterics, eyes aid quickly. Is there note in a baker? Thaka man raise a dillis stentises, Hester ted walking, as of top you shusha wear totters, as see meta baby adam effingting ing 10. Sir, you have it all 11, the man insisted, gritting gisteth from a timum, a period divershisel, if the tita cooled sparwees to wagey and tank officers, like an aquariumal toss, filled with some mercufer core, juiced astham and wafosto. So me and Neil Sakaminki asked in Sir Weffams, closey to Thestrington, this Newman, dress at Ensimakiferfoshin, stop at Befrefa Fenton, then, Tenternadair into Fion Tittle, Thefferstone lost it. It looks like Hettold Thizither Pons, hurry up Sakanagation, Thremen Hawaii Stalefrin Terratent, then and in front of an Tustin. His eyes bulged. Beads of sweat appeared on his face. I see R.A. Ned my neck. Michael ducked down to take a look and gasped. Higweshes friendo lawful laudally thethered man perstilum tem, also clad in protective gear. He sounded almost sad. It DIDN single quote CM real. He was carrying the dead, limp, badly bruised Bador Pfeffens, maybe 16. The teen slims when 110, resembling Benton Trander. His neck seemed liquestus, hanging Glamelian Terran. Yeah. It's a crying shame. Thema nexteth and tiffin tiffis. No let's get the store and tetting. Suddenly, bosmenirthit and tordentisa. They froze, shocked. Their mouths hung open. Something in the tank floated into view. Get out. The man in front offers. You didn't see thing. No totem thing. Hep a shed hard. Nearly sending me fort. Hep practical a killikick. Whose creed a winter cowering behendly. Hep a ganticree, I scoop at him upentorin 10. Tell Anion and yo harm. You're fucking dead. Head definitely Anton. Michael Andehovafi Fentefaful. Soon I like Illilipulafus, Huant Stagutagan, Bravalit Lagai, Batsami Thinktelajusum, Eovena formal diagens, due to wold at buffed wintic, the world is nasamply. Dash too much for me and I see in thavimis and peridry, no twinthosigali tusli to max rethergerterter, I vedo nilo de farishation, strilling genetus, if their friends, toster friends refon tort, smen war prolefters, erode often, ents been theor fall of terct, at a time of night, when the park was closed, at WAS and single quotes the difficult FORME to put to and to together. Perhaps the wander keister, perhaps the hapaplast, Sati dent wanton terabim, and besides comma, they had to liven up their mere CH-producing, money-making monster ride with new props somehow, like Sade High D on single quotes to know if that conclusion is correct. But I see in single quotes TC any other explanation. Maybe me swear a religion, may by twassels amadrad, thekidus dugisnals, hacken handleaning, ithing quas botherberry, mean yelling manthan bequintefi. Try as he might, I can forget. Thatuk and wat cold befefisterix dizes hydrofluoric acid. Something like a that. Had tobe. In una verbabla fati, floating the ghost like an peaceful tententi. Story 5. My father owned an amusement park. I've been having dreams about that summer, persistent dreams. I can't fall asleep without seeing my dad's face. It's why I started seeing a therapist in the first place, because of those dreams. Those fucking dreams, they always start when I first saw the theme park. We're in his office. I must have been sad because he claps me on the back and says there's no reason to cry, no reason at all. His voice scratches at my ears that I remember. There's little I remember of my father, Lee says, that has something to do with trauma, but I don't think so. He was quiet when I was young and absent when I was older. That did more to cover him up than anything he did. But he did a lot of things. My dad owned the theme park. He built it. He bought some old farmer's property and built a roller coaster on it. I don't know whether it was the divorce that caused it or it caused the divorce. It's not like I can ask. He wasn't even planning on even selling tickets to the place at first. My dad was never particularly stable. My mom got full custody for the first few years after the divorce, and he moved halfway across the country as soon as the papers were filed. That's where he built it. They negotiated terms. When I was about 11, I would stay with him during the summers, but I stayed at my old school. That always made sense to me. Summer was peak season. He built the roller coaster first. I remember that. He hired a bunch of contractors, painted it green, and then called it Nessie. That thing broke down 3 times a week. I swear to God, I can't believe they even let us keep it running. That thing was a death trap. Then came the carnival games, those types of things with water guns and 2 small hoops. He hired a couple townies to do that, to man the stands, too. It's been a while, a long while. I'm sorry if I don't get everything right. It all blew up from there. We had more attractions. When I was 17, there were bumper cars themed like a circus, with elephants and clowns and chipped paint. Those were always popular. His favorite was the Tunnel of Love. I don't think we ever got more than 6 people to ride on that a day. I guess I should say why I said we. My dad, even though he was very well off, was a cheap fuck. Or maybe he was trying to get closer to me. I don't know. I don't know a lot about my dad. Looking back, whatever it was, he made me work there through the summer. He never left that park. I swear, he would just hand me the keys to his place and then say he'd get back when he could. Always came home at 1 in the morning, left at 5. He always went back to the park, setting everything up, doing paperwork. I was 17 when it happened. I had already decided by then, by the time I left that place and turned 18, I would never look back. I hated that fucking theme park. I hated it so much. It was all he could talk about, too. He always said this place had a history, even though he built it 10 years before. That summer, I was mainly running the bumper cars and the coaster, as my dad squirreled himself in an office at the edge of the property. I know everyone who worked there that summer. There weren't ever more than 20 in the best years, but that year we had 13. I was the only one from out of town. Everyone else was from the surrounding area townies. My dad called them, as if he hadn't been a history professor 11 years earlier. There were about 5 of us that always hung out and fucked around. There was Chuck, who went to the college nearby and needed extra cash. There was Landon, a year older than me, who was always the odd man out, with his black-dyed hair and metal T-shirts, and who we knew nothing about. We always joked with increasingly unconvincing tales about his family life. There was Sarah, who worked there since I did, but legally minors were almost certainly not allowed to be doing the stuff I was doing around the park, so she was 22, at least. Then there was Lucy. This was her first year at the park, and I was crushing on her hard. I could barely get a sentence finished around her. It was almost sad, really, how much I fell for this girl within the first week. Chuck and Sarah teased me mercilessly. I can't remember her voice. It's crazy what you forget. It's like a silent movie when I think about her, but I know she had a pretty voice. God, I don't know what she's doing now. I hope she's all right. I know we never talked after that summer. How could we? Really, how Caldanian? I'm getting ahead of myself again. Every time I try to tell this story, I just jump to the end. What else am I supposed to jump to? Why shouldn't I know? Lee says that doesn't help with the sessions. It just makes me relive the trauma without contextualizing it. That just sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. I remember that summer a lot when I actually try to think about it. I can remember the way the paint peeled off of the sign. I can remember the way that one bumper car, red 3, kept breaking down, because a couple of kids always managed to slam it against the wall at full force. I can remember the day the first kid disappeared. It was bright and sunny. The place was overrun with locals. I was leaning against the control panel for the coaster as some guy barfed up his cotton candy a couple feet left of me. She came up to me crying. God, she was crying. She wasn't worried or angry or scared. She was already distraught. Did she know? Somehow, did she figure it out? She ran up to me and screamed about some lost kid. I call it in on my walkie-talkie. Chuck made some joke about it, which she heard and started crying louder about. Not here, he says. I check with Andrew, who's manning the customer relations desk, which is our bullshit name for a help kiosk. Not here, he says. I check with Sarah on the bumper cars, see if they have any kids running around there. Not here, she says. I check around concessions. Not there. I check around walkie-talkies for another 5 minutes before we do a search. It takes an hour before we call the cops. My dad shut down the park early that day to help the investigation, he said. I can remember how he said it, and I can smell the whiskey on his breath. The police searched for 3 hours in the park and the woods around, as this mother's wailing the whole time. I can remember how that sounds. It's stuck in my head. I don't think I'll ever forget it. They called off the search at midnight, I heard. They say they'll fully search the woods in the morning. My dad came home on time. That night he slept soundly. The police do it again in the morning, with less effort, but they don't find him. Nobody ever saw that kid again. It's a sad thing, sure, but that's happened before. Sometimes people disappear. It's sad, but you keep on going. The next 3 weeks pass in a flash. I remember the energy of the place afterward. All of us were shaken up by it, but Lucy was definitely the worst off of all of us. She had never really done that sort of stuff before, and all this missing kid stuff messed with her bad. I remember Chuck making a joke about it, and then she left in a huff. Must have been 30 out. We were closing up for the night. It was the first time we really talked. We had made jokes or whatever, but that's when we actually started to trust each other. We started dating a week later. I don't remember how it started, but I knew I was happy. For a brief moment, I had a normal summer. The second kid disappeared not long after that. It was a dad this time, a single father, worried out of his mind. Thomas Earhart. I remember seeing the kid getting cotton candy and then running around. I saw a lot of kids around there, but I remember him. Red hair, glasses, teeth missing from his mouth. I don't know why I remember that kid. Memory's a strange thing, and sometimes it picks up only the least important stuff. That time, it caught him. I was watching him, I know that. Something about him struck me. I guess it's a sort of intuition. He vanished into that crowd. Thomas Earhart. I remember his name, even now. I remember the picture the cops showed me, that same kid smiling, happy, with a family. There were 2 sisters, 2 parents. They were so happy. God, they were so fucking happy. He was never seen again. He vanished into that crowd, screaming, laughing, and then we never saw him again. It was the same routine. We searched for an hour, and then the police were called, and then nothing. They took our statements, and then found nothing. They always say I had the problem of not seeing it sooner, but the cops had the same information I did. They knew what I knew. They did nothing. I'm getting out of order. I jump to the end. But I know I don't want to go there. Not yet. After Thomas disappeared, I was reassigned. I had been working on bumper cars for the past 2 weeks, but I got reassigned. My dad put Chuck on the bumper cars because he caught me smoking outside the back of the park. He always hated me smoking, called it morally abhorrent, that it would tear up my lungs. They were his cigarettes. He reassigned me to the tunnel of love because he knew I hated it. I was overjoyed. Lucy was working just next door. Every second I wasn't watching the tunnel, I would let the controls go on autopilot and then flirt with her, of course, when it didn't break down. That thing broke down every fucking day, even when it couldn't have had more than a dozen people going on it a day. I guess I should explain the ride just a little bit. It was a dark ride, a slow meandering trot through the world of love. Whatever kitschy bullshit that is. There was this disgusting river of water below the boats as the boat moved from room to room, so you could admire the scenery. It was never my thing. I don't think it was anyone's thing. It just was. My dad had to have put a lot of money into it. There were the dioramas, the little paintings on the walls, and a second track to put the boats on for maintenance. That second track was really just a tunnel into a storage area, a couple of dilapidated props, and some shit he had bought from a garage sale. And then there were the animatronics. I hated those animatronics. Big cartoon animals, pink and with hearts everywhere. They were teddy bears and chickens, and all these animals with eyes that were too fucking big. They gave kids nightmares whenever they went on it, and couples, who were the only consistent group to go on it, never came back after they saw those things. I told my dad to take them out so many times, just let it be a dark ride. But he couldn't let that happen. My dad was a mess at home and in his office, but he obsessed over the tunnel. He couldn't do anything but think about that thing. That's why it reeked of cleaning supplies. He was cleaning it every single day, whenever it was closed, even as people dipped from one room of the ride to another. This was his small world, and he wasn't going to let me ruin that. It was something compulsive. We knew that. He had been like that round certain rooms of the house before the divorce. I worked on that ride for the rest of the summer. It was supposed to be completely normal, even after those kids disappeared. We'd had something bad like that before, but never together. The police kept looking, but an officer on the premises wasn't a common sight anymore. They told us that they believed it was just a random chance that these two got lost at the same time. Told us to keep a lookout. That was supposed to be it. I began thinking of getting out of there again. I told myself I'd work another year, maybe move out here, even though I hated the place, because Lucy and I were starting to seem somewhat serious, even though it had only been a month and a half. We were kids. Everything seemed like it would last forever. The third kid disappeared at the end of June, a girl. Her name was Charlotte. I remember all of their names. The police swarmed the place then, and we had to shut down the place. My dad hated that. He was a cheap fuck, and losing a whole day, even to this, seemed like the loss of the century. That was the first time I saw Detective Green. I'll call him that because his name was kind of like that. Big guy, big, bald guy, probably around 300 pounds, 6'3". My dad was dwarfed by him. Detective Green told us that there was an active investigation. Landon, the weirdo, had a cousin on the force. He was the one who told me they thought it was somebody who did it. 3 kids disappearing within 2 months wasn't a coincidence. That made my stomach sink. Even though I hated the place, I still felt a little for my dad. He put his whole life in this place, and if they shut it down a week with the low overheads, could kill the place. I know that probably wasn't what I should have first thought of. Those were kids. They vanished, disappeared. I still think of Thomas first. Red hair, glasses, disappearing into the crowd. He seemed invincible, running around, and I couldn't imagine someone wanting to hurt that kid. I couldn't comprehend it, that any of these people wandering throughout the park could have done it. Hundreds of strangers, hundreds of suspects. The whole thing scared me, even though I wouldn't have admitted it. We were all pretty messed up about it, Lucy especially. Everyone except Landon. Landon had always been weird, loved true crime, horror movies, anything scary. He was a year or 2 older than me. Went to the university nearby, I think. We barely talked to him. I'll be honest. Because Landon always creeped us out. He was a friend, I guess, but I knew we talked shit about him a lot. We were kids. I feel awful about how we treated him. We knew better, at least. We should have. Landon was never weirded out by all these disappearances, even as much as we were. I'll never forget what he told me when talking about it one day. It was bound to happen sometime. I never liked talking to Landon. Police swarmed the place after they shut it down. We still worked there some days, but they shut it down to any public presence. They didn't want to contaminate the evidence or whatever, but they had no proof that the kids were anywhere on the property. The woods outside the park were just short of being a state park. The rangers were looking for those kids day and night, and having an officer in the park wouldn't have done anything. I wonder if Detective Green did that for a reason. I have no real clue what went on in that guy's head, not even now. All I know is that he weirded me out. A lot of things weirded me out. Maybe it was just the circumstances, but Green would always look at me like I was a monster. We worked on the park, just checking on rides, making sure that everything was functional. That was the only concession my dad could wring out of the cops. If the park rides broke down or closed and we didn't get to them until reopening, we'd be fucked. That I was all right with. I needed that check. Moving out of my mom's house was never going to be cheap. That's funny. I was always focused on the future those days, and now I can't stop thinking about that past. They promised they'd reopen the park after 2 weeks if they didn't find anything. They checked that place from head to toe, the roller coaster, the bumper cars, the back shed, the offices, even taking a glance through the tunnel of love, but they didn't find a thing. Not a shred. The police department shifted towards combing through the forests, but everyone in town knew they had fucked up. If they had focused on the forest in the first place, then those kids wouldn't have had more time to fall into the caverns or vanish into the woods. 3 kids disappearing around the same time in a theme park is a horrific coincidence, we said. We were trying to rationalize it because we couldn't believe that someone could have taken those kids. I remember all 5 of us hanging out, smoking outside of a convenience store way past midnight. It was the hottest August night I can remember. My dad would have been either asleep or at work by then. Either way, he wouldn't have noticed I was gone. We were dumb kids, I remember that. We thought the world was going to be ours, and that seemed so realistic. I thought I was going to make something of myself, but summer killed a lot of things in me. Lucy always made me feel like everything was going to be all right. That's why I liked her at first. She kept me at ease. We were smoking in the parking lot and talking about how the police fucked this up. 3 kids missing. I don't remember who said it, but someone got the idea we should go into the theme park, do some detective work ourselves. Maybe it was just because we were stoned out of our minds, but it seemed like a good idea. At least to half of us. Landon thought it was stupid, ran off, and Sarah had no interest in skulking around the place any more at night than she did at day. That left Chuck, me, and Lucy, but she barely wanted to go. The place looked so much worse in the day. It was charming and a bit rickety, but at night all the wrong things stood out. The shadows of the coaster were silhouetted black against the dark blue sky. The only thing lit was the "Do Not Enter" sign, a little hint of brightness among the night. The whole thing gave me the creeps. I didn't let myself show it. Chuck turned back as soon as we had come, leaving the 2 of us. "Fuck this," he said. We should have followed him away. I fished a flashlight from my glove compartment and flicked it on, bathing the fence in the flickering light. I remember that, too. I remember the way the light glittered off of the fence, shining in the night. We tried to push the gate open, but my dad had locked it with a chain. He didn't want anyone to get in. I navigated around the fence, searching for a hole in the place. Lucy told me to give it up, but I kept urging her forward. The fucker doing this is too scared to get anyone besides kids. I was an asshole back then. It took me about 15 minutes before we found a hole in the mesh I could barely fit through, even though I wasn't the tallest. Lucy followed in after me, clutching at my arm. She was shivering in the heat. We took to the bumper cars. First, their shadows were massive with the flashlight, drenching the walls in dark. All the magic, the bare hint of it my father had managed to accumulate, vanished in the harsh shadows and light of the night. My teeth began to chatter when I remembered the girl, Charlotte. She had vanished around the bumper cars. We continued walking, but I stopped talking. Lucy was right about this. I realized then I never should have gone there. We went to the darts next, then the concessions. Lucy saw a rat by the cotton candy and screamed to high heaven. We went to the roller coaster, but that had been shut down for repairs a week earlier. Everything was always breaking down. Everything. They were patchwork reconstruction, barely able to continue going. I don't think my dad spent more than a penny on that place, looking back. It's like he wanted it all to end with an accident. We wandered throughout the whole park, ducking under cobwebs and searching into the corners my dad wouldn't want us to go. We looked through his office, this short, fat building that could see the rest of the park, hidden next to the log flume. The door was locked, but if you jiggled the window just right, you could get it to open. I'd done that a dozen times to steal rum from his cabinet. It was covered with papers, head to toe. It looked like the place had been ripped apart. If the police really had been investigating thoroughly, maybe that was their work. Detective Green had probably read every single document in here. The place looked like a tornado had gone through. We got out of there, quick. I didn't want to linger and leave a trace. My dad was methodical. My stomach twisted up as soon as we got back outside, as soon as I noticed it. "Do you smell that?" she had said, and I can still see her there standing in the night. The wind was blowing from the north end of the park. Bleach. I started walking towards the tunnel of love, not even thinking about what I was doing. Everything goes in slow motion. As I look back on it, it feels like it took an eternity to walk from my dad's office to the tunnel. I told myself that there was nothing to fear. Nothing had gone wrong. It didn't stop my stomach from twisting up further. I was never that good of a liar, not even to myself. In the day, it had been kitschy, maybe a bit rickety, but it looked like haunted in the middle of the night. The smell of bleach overtook me. It couldn't have been that long since it was sprayed. Minutes, even. It could have been minutes since my father put another spray of disinfectant. In their end, I still think of that all these years later. What if he had seen me? What would he say? What would Hato? I stalked inside, moving as slowly as we could. We were afraid because it hit us. Then it made us realize what truly could have been happening. The place was horrifically dark, and it felt like my flashlight was barely peeking through it. I fumbled for the power switch right under the main console. It was a great, big lever, and yanked it down, making the whole place alight. We were supposed to be stealthy, of course. but I didn't even think of it as I turned the switch on. We rarely pulled the full lights on in the tunnel. Usually we'd do a lesser rig, a couple lights to instill a romantic atmosphere. The place would be lit in purples and pinks, bright Valentine's colors. It hid all the dirty parts, the holes in the wall, the dirty water. The place was drenched in that hideous light as soon as I pulled the lever. I had never seen it like this for long. The wallpaper was old and faded, ripped apart at the edges, all of it covered in hearts and mold. Cupid looked rotten. The carts began moving through the unclean sludge of the water, filled with sick and stale water, missing its weekly cleaning, turning brownish in the fluorescence. The river smelled like shit and piss. Everything else smelled like bleach. The walls, the floor, the air, everything. We had to cough to get through the stench. She asked me to head back, then to turn the lights off. She didn't want to venture any further, but I didn't let her. We have to find out, I had said, but I don't think I really knew then what I could have found out. I don't think I ever had a chance. I got in one of the boats, careful not to get any of the water on me. Lucy followed, more out of duty than any want. The boats began to move sluggishly through the muck. You could hear it creak. No cute music to hide it. I could hear Lucy start to breathe heavier as the boat moved further and further along the track, the scent growing ever stronger. I don't think my hair was even on end. I wasn't brave. I just didn't understand what was happening. I hadn't figured out what the smell under the bleach, under the shit, was. It was some mystery scent, something I couldn't quite place, deep and slightly fruity. I know it now. I know it like I know the back of my hand. Everything seemed a lot clearer, with fluorescence on full blast. The hearts and the cupids were scattered around the ceiling. I could see now that the cupids were little baby dolls he had attached cardboard wings to. We moved further. The music started up, then, which I know made both of us jump. The smell of bleach got stronger as we moved further and further. I clutched the flashlight. She was talking to me then, telling me we should turn back or something. I wasn't paying attention. All I did was stare forward as the boat moved slowly ever onwards. I wasn't thinking. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Even now it's hard to put it all together. The images flash and swap, and all I know is that we're getting closer. As I write this, I can see us there, trapped in that fucking boat, waiting for all of it to end, because I know where it ends. I know what happens next. I've been having this nightmare for months, years, maybe. I always dreamed about this moment, sitting in the boat, knowing what happens next. Sometimes Lucy's there, sometimes not. Sometimes it's my dad sitting in the seat next to me, and no matter how loud I yell, he can never hear me. I always wake up before we get there. It feels like a century before we finally make it to the animatronics. I say that, but they didn't move. They were big dolls, standing still as preset music began to play. They seemed so different in the normal light than they did in the pink one. Their cartoony faces seem closer to plastic. Their heads are plastic, and the bodies are some sort of plush suit. I had never really looked at them closely. My dad had always said that it was too dangerous to step near them, to let the professionals have it. What if I had looked early enough? What if I had seen what he had done? They were plastic and fluff, but they reeked of the bleach and the scent beneath. I wanted to run, really. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible because every bit of me told me that this was wrong. But instead I stepped off the boat and onto the side of the ride, where the animatronics, the mannequins, stood so still. I wanted to vomit as I edged closer. Lucy was yelling, now telling me to get back in the boat, but I didn't listen. I moved to the mannequin, a pink bear whose eyes were a glittered blue, and whose paint had been chipped off, and I pulled off the plastic head. The real one beneath almost came off with it. The face had rotted like a pumpkin, melting and graying as the innards came pouring out. I could barely tell that it was a human face, but I could make out the barest pieces. The red hair, the glasses, I could make out Thomas, the boy I had seen on the posters and in the park and who had vanished into the crowd. And then I vomited. The next few hours are a blur. I have no memory of leaving the tunnel, going through the park, or calling the police. It took them a day to arrest my dad, a month for them to try him. I went home to live with my mom after that, and I never came back to that town. I never came back to that amusement park. I don't think I ever could have. All I can think about when I look up that place or read about it or think of it is what those families could have had. What those families could have had if my father hadn't taken it away from them. Every time I think of it, in the end, I get out of sync. I get back to the beginning of the dream, back when I was 11 years old, when my dad first took me to the park. But I wasn't sad. No, I wasn't. How could I be, with my father owning a theme park? I was so happy. Everything's stained with it. Now, I can't think of my dad without thinking of what he did. But I was so happy. Then he took me across the park, and there's this one sentence that stuck with me then. There's no reason to cry, no reason at all. He clapped me on the back, looked over the park, still halfway in construction, and smiled. I realize now he wasn't talking to me. He was looking dead on, right out the window of his office, straight at the tunnel of love.